Whispers of rejection echo louder than a wolf's howl on a silent winter night. When a woman is stripped of her title, deemed too remarkably ordinary to lead a pack, she is cast aside like worthless scrap metal. Yet destiny plays a cruel and magnificent game. What the arrogant fools of the Silverpines discarded, the most feared ruler of the entire lycanthrope realm, caught with reverence. A quiet demeanor hides the deepest strength, and a face untouched by arrogance holds the power to conquer a king. This is the chronicle of a discarded pawn who checkmated a kingdom. The great hall of the Silverpine pack was awash in the warm, flickering glow of 1,000 tallow candles. Banners of forest green and silver hung from the rafters, swaying gently in the draughts that snuck through the ancient stone walls. It was the night of the winter solstice, the traditional evening for the Alpha to officially claim his Luna and bind their spirits before the goddess and the pack. Standing at the center of the dais was Beatrix. She wore a simple gown of pale grey wool, completely unadorned, save for a single silver clasp at her shoulder. She had never been a woman of striking, heart-stopping beauty. Her hair was a standard shade of chestnut brown, often escaping its braids, and her eyes were a soft, muted hazel. Her face was dotted with a smattering of pale freckles, and her frame was slight, lacking the voluptuous curves or the fierce, imposing height expected of a werewolf matriarch. She was quiet, an observer rather than a commander, possessing a sharp intellect that she kept hidden behind a veil of humility. Beside her stood Alpha Silas, a man carved from marble and arrogance. Broad-shouldered, with striking ice-blue eyes and a mane of golden hair, he was the picture of lupine perfection. He had been betrothed to Beatrix since they were adolescents, a political arrangement made by their late fathers to merge two powerful bloodlines. But as they grew, Silas's ambition had outpaced his honor. A heavy silence fell over the gathered hundreds as the elder shaman stepped forward, holding the ceremonial chalice. Silas did not reach for it. Instead, he turned his back on the shaman and faced the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces before landing on someone in the front row. The Silverpine pack is entering a new era of dominance, Silas's voice boomed, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. We face threats from the southern rogue territories and the harsh winters of the north. To lead this pack into battle, to inspire fear in our enemies and pride in our warriors, I need a Luna who commands the room the moment she enters it. A true queen. Beatrix felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. She looked up at Silas, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Beatrix," Silas said, his voice dropping a fraction, dripping with a patronizing pity that cut deeper than a knife. "You are a good woman, dutiful, obedient. But look at yourself. You are too plain to stand at the pinnacle of our hierarchy. You lack the filth, the presence, the sheer dominance required to be the Luna of the Silverpines. I, Silas, Alpha of the Silverpines, formally reject you as my mate and Luna." A collective gasp echoed through the hall. The public humiliation was absolute. Beatrix stood frozen, the color draining from her face. She didn't cry. Her pride, though battered, refused to allow him the satisfaction of her tears. "Instead," Silas continued, reaching his hand down into the crowd, "I claim Genevieve as my true mate and rightful Luna." Genevieve, Beatrix's own cousin, stepped up onto the dais. She was breathtaking, a vision in deep crimson silk, with hair the color of spun gold and piercing green eyes. She practically radiated smug satisfaction as she took Silas's hand, pressing herself against his side. She was everything Beatrix was not. Loud, fiercely beautiful, and exceptionally cunning. Before the shock could fully settle over the hall, The heavy oak doors at the far end of the room crashed open. The frigid winter wind howled into the hall, blowing out dozens of candles. A solitary figure strode in, boots clicking heavily against the stone. He wore armor of blackened steel and a cloak of absolute black fur. It was Lord Cedric, an emissary of King Alaric, the Alpha King of the Obsidian Crown. The Obsidian Crown ruled all Pax, a legendary and brutal kingdom nestled in the treacherous, jagged peaks of the northern reaches. King Alaric was known as the Beast of the North, a massive, battle-scarred warlord who was rumored to have slaughtered an entire pack of rogues single-handedly. He ruled through fear and absolute, terrifying power. "Alpha Silas," Cedric announced, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I bring a decree from King Alaric. The king demands the fulfillment of the century-old treaty. The Silver Pines must offer a high-born female of the Alpha's bloodline to the Obsidian Keep to serve the king in whatever capacity he deems fit. A bride, a hostage, or a servant. You have until dawn to provide her, or the king's army will march upon your borders." Panic erupted in the hall. To be sent to the Obsidian Keep was considered a death sentence, or a life of unspeakable misery under the heel of a madman. Silas's eyes darted frantically. He looked at Genevieve, who gripped his arm in terror. He could not send his newly claimed beautiful Luna. He could not send his sisters. His gaze slowly slid back to Beatrix, who still stood marginalized at the edge of the dais. A cruel, calculating light sparked in his ice-blue eyes. "Lord Cedric," Silas said smoothly, stepping forward and gesturing toward Beatrix. "The Silver Pines are ever loyal to the Alpha King. I present to you Beatrix, daughter of the former Alpha. She is of the purest bloodline. We gladly offer her to King Alaric." Beatrix's breath hitched. She had just been publicly discarded for being too plain, and now she was being thrown to the wolves, literally handed over to a tyrant to save the skin of the man who had just broken her heart. She was a peace offering wrapped in humiliation, given away because she was entirely expendable. The journey to the Obsidian Keep was a grueling, agonizing descent into the freezing unknown. Beatrix was allowed no time to pack her belongings, no tearful goodbyes. She was shoved into a heavily armored carriage, escorted by 20 of King Alaric's elite shadow guards, commanded by the stoic Beta Kael. For 2 weeks, the carriage rattled over treacherous mountain passes and through forests so dense the sun barely penetrated the canopy. Beatrix huddled beneath heavy firs, staring blankly at the frosted windows. She felt nothing but a hollow emptiness. Her entire life had been orchestrated for a destiny that was snatched away in mere seconds, only to be replaced by a terrifying uncertainty. She had heard the horrific tales of King Alaric. They said he was disfigured, a monster who drank the blood of his enemies and kept his court in a state of perpetual terror. They said he had no heart, only a lump of cold obsidian in his chest. Beatrix resigned herself to her fate. If she warned Qualcomm she was to be a scullery maid, she would scrub the stone floors until they gleamed. If she was to be a sacrifice, she would meet the blade with the quiet dignity Silas claimed she lacked. As the carriage finally breached the final mountain pass, the Obsidian Keep loomed into view. It was a staggering architectural marvel, carved directly into the side of a massive black mountain. The spires reached up like dark fingers, clawing at the grey sky, and the massive iron gates looked impenetrable. It was a fortress of nightmares. The carriage ground to a halt in the central courtyard. Beta Kael opened the door, offering a gauntleted hand. Beatrix ignored it, stepping out onto the icy cobblestones under her own power. Her plain grey dress was wrinkled, her chestnut hair hopelessly tangled from the journey. She looked like a beggar, not a high-born peace offering. She was led through cavernous halls lit by braziers of blue flame. The sheer scale of the keep made her feel incredibly small. Finally, massive double doors of solid ebony swung open, revealing the throne room. The room was vast and shadowed, the air heavy with an intoxicating, rich scent of pine, ozone, and dark chocolate. At the far end, sitting upon a throne forged from jagged swords and dark stone, was King Alaric. As Beatrix was led closer, she dared to lift her eyes. The rumors of his size were not exaggerated. Alaric was a titan of a man, his shoulders impossibly broad. He was dressed in dark leather and velvet, a massive broadsword resting casually against his throne. But he was not a disfigured monster. He had a strong, aristocratic jawline, high cheekbones, and thick raven-black hair. A single jagged scar ran down over his left eye, but rather than marring his features, it gave him a rugged, dangerous magnetism. His eyes, a piercing shade of amber, locked onto hers. The entire court fell into a deathly silence. Emissaries, lords, and lethal warriors held their breath as the infamous Beast of the North assessed his new tribute. Silas's envoy, a sycophantic man named Lord Lysander, stepped forward and bowed low. "Your Majesty, King Alaric, the Silverpine Pack sends you this offering. Beatrix. She is of noble blood, though, admittedly, unremarkable in presentation. Alpha Silas hopes she will be of some use to your kitchens or lower staff." A low, terrifying growl rumbled from the chest of the king. It vibrated through the stone floor, rattling the armor of the guards. Lord Lysander paled, taking a hurried step backward. Alaric slowly stood up. He bypassed the terrified envoy entirely, descending the stone steps of the dais with the lethal grace of an apex predator. He stopped mere inches from Beatrix. Up close, his sheer size was overwhelming, yet Beatrix did not flinch. She kept her chin parallel to the floor, her hazel eyes meeting his amber ones. Alaric didn't see a plain woman. His wolf, which had been dormant and restless for decades, was suddenly howling in absolute ecstasy. The scent that filled the room, vanilla, old parchment, and a sharp, clean earthiness, was coming directly from her. He reached out a massive, calloused hand. The court gasped, expecting him to strike her or grab her by the throat. Instead, his long fingers gently brushed a stray lock of tangled chestnut hair behind her ear. His touch was shockingly warm, almost reverent. "Unremarkable?" Alaric's voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down Beatrix's spine. He didn't break eye contact with her as he spoke to the room. "The Silverpines are blind fools who couldn't recognize a diamond if they were choking on it." He turned his amber glare toward Lord Lysander. "Tell your Alpha that his debt is paid, and tell him that if he or his pack ever speaks of this woman with anything less than absolute reverence, I will march south and burn his forests to ash." Alaric turned back to Beatrix, his expression softening in a way that left his terrifying reputation in tatters. "You are cold," he said simply. He unclasped his heavy black fur cloak and draped it over her small shoulders, enveloping her in his intoxicating scent and warmth. "Kael," Alaric commanded, "escort our honored guest to the Starfall chambers. Have Lady Matilda prepare a bath and bring her a wardrobe fitting for the highest lady of this keep." Beatrix stood utterly bewildered. She had been sent away to be discarded, yet the most feared king in the realm had just cloaked her in his own fur and treated her like a sovereign. The Starfall chambers were a stark contrast to the dark, imposing exterior of the keep. The walls were draped in rich tapestries of midnight blue and silver, and a massive hearth roared with a comforting fire. The bed was large enough to fit 5 people, piled high with silk sheets and down comforters. Beatrix sat in a copper tub filled with steaming water infused with rose oil, her mind spinning. Lady Matilda, an older, maternal woman with kind eyes and a swift, efficient demeanour, gently washed her hair. "The king has not given the Starfall chambers to anyone since his mother passed," Matilda murmured, pouring warm water over Beatrix's shoulders. "You have certainly caught his attention, child." "I don't understand," Beatrix whispered, staring at her own unremarkable reflection in a silver hand mirror resting on a velvet stool. "I am nothing special. Alpha Silas made that perfectly clear in front of hundreds. I am too plain, too quiet," Matilda chuckled, wrapping a massive, fluffy towel around Beatrix as she stepped from the tub. "Loudness is often a cover for emptiness, my dear, and beauty fades faster than a winter sunset. King Alaric does not value baubles. He values rare steel, and he has eyes that see far deeper than the fools in the south." Over the next few weeks, Beatrix's life transformed completely. She was not forced to work. She was not locked away. She was treated with an exquisite level of care that left her constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was provided with gowns of velvet and silk, tailored to fit her perfectly, though she always chose the more understated colors: deep forest greens, rich burgundies, and midnight blues. Finding herself with endless free time, Beatrix gravitated toward the king's massive library. It was a cavernous room filled with thousands of ancient tomes, maps, and scrolls. Because she was naturally quiet and observant, she often went unnoticed by the scholars and strategists who came in and out. One late evening, she was sitting in a high-backed leather chair by a window, deeply engrossed in a complex treatise on military supply lines and siege tactics. "I assumed you would prefer the poetry section," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Beatrix jumped, nearly dropping the heavy tome. King Alaric stood there, dressed simply in a white linen shirt and dark trousers, looking relaxed but inherently dangerous. "Poetry is beautiful, Your Majesty," Beatrix replied, carefully placing a bookmark in the pages. "But poetry does not feed an army during a 6-month winter blockade." Alaric's amber eyes flared with genuine surprise and intense interest. He walked over, pulling up a chair opposite hers. "And what does a young woman from the Silver Pines know of winter blockades?" "I know that the southern packs rely entirely on their summer harvests," she explained, her voice steadying as she engaged in a topic she understood. If an enemy blocked the river trade route before the first snow, the Silver Pines would starve by February. They are arrogant, assuming their martial strength negates the need for logistical foresight. For the next 3 hours, they didn't speak of packs, mates, or the cruel twist of fate that brought her there. They debated strategy, history, and economics. Alaric was astounded. Beneath her quiet, unassuming exterior lay a razor-sharp intellect and a profound understanding of the world. She didn't flatter him. She challenged him. She pointed out flaws in his own border defenses with a polite but firm logic that left his seasoned generals looking foolish in comparison. Alaric realized that she wasn't just his fated mate in scent and soul. She was an intellectual equal. She was the anchor his chaotic, violent kingdom desperately needed. The true test of her worth, however, came during the winter solstice gala at the Obsidian Keep. Emissaries from all over the realm were present, including Lord Lysander, who was sent to ensure the plain sacrifice hadn't angered the king. The grand hall was a sea of jewels, elaborate masks, and loud, boastful conversations. Beatrix stood quietly near a massive stone pillar, observing the room. She wore a stunning, yet simple, gown of dark sapphire, her chestnut hair pinned up elegantly with silver combs. She blended into the shadows, a wallflower by choice, which allowed her to see everything. Her sharp eyes tracked Lord Reginald, an ambitious beta from a rebellious eastern province. He had been overly friendly all evening, a stark contrast to his usual sullen demeanour. She watched as Reginald smoothly bumped into the king's personal cupbearer. In a sleight of hand so fast it was almost imperceptible, Reginald dropped a small, clear vial into the goblet meant for Alaric. The plain woman who was supposedly too slow and unremarkable for a throne moved with terrifying speed. As the cupbearer approached the high table and offered the goblet to King Alaric, Beatrix stepped out from the shadows. Before Alaric's fingers could close around the gem-encrusted gold, Beatrix's hand shot out, slapping the goblet with tremendous force. The heavy gold cup clattered against the stone floor, the dark red wine spilling across the dais. The liquid immediately hissed and bubbled as it touched the stone, eating away at the rock with a sickening, acrid smoke. The music stopped. The hall fell into a stunned, horrified silence. Alaric stared at the bubbling stone, then at Beatrix, who was breathing heavily, her hazel eyes locked on Lord Reginald. "Guards!" Alaric roared, the sound shattering the silence like thunder. "Seize Lord Reginald!" Reginald tried to bolt, but Kyle and 3 shadow guards tackled him to the floor before he made it 10 paces. Alaric turned to Beatrix. He didn't ask how she knew. He didn't demand an explanation. He simply saw the woman who had just saved his life, not through brute force or magical prowess, but through the quiet, meticulous observation that everyone else had despised her for. He stepped forward and took her shaking hands in his massive ones. He looked out over the shocked assembly, his gaze lingering purposefully on the pale, sweating face of the Silverpine emissary, Lord Lysander. The fools of the South threw away a priceless gem because it was not polished to their vulgar tastes. Alaric's voice echoed through the hall, absolute and unyielding. They sent her here as a mockery. But tonight, she has proven that true power does not roar. True power observes, understands, and strikes with perfect precision. Alaric dropped to one knee, a gesture that sent a shockwave of disbelief through the northern lords. The beast of the north bowed to no one. "Beatrix of the Silverpines is no servant. She is no mere guest," Alaric declared, pressing a kiss to the back of her hand. "She is my mate, and from this night forward, she is the undeniable lunar queen of the Obsidian Crown. Anyone who questions her authority answers to my blade." The ascension of Beatrix from a discarded, unremarkable offering to the lunar queen of the Obsidian Crown was not marked by a bloody conquest, but by a quiet, seismic shift in the kingdom's foundation. King Alaric, terrifying in battle and absolute in his authority, had always ruled through the strength of his armies and the sheer force of his will. But a kingdom cannot eat swords, and armor provides no warmth against a failing economy. Beatrix brought the order that the North desperately lacked. She did not attempt to change Alaric's fierce nature. Instead, she complemented it perfectly. Where he was the storm, she was the stone harbor. She took over the chaotic administrative duties of the keep, spending her days in the sprawling war rooms with Alaric's most trusted advisors. She worked closely with Chancellor Desmond, a grizzled, cynical man who initially doubted her capabilities. Beatrix won his loyalty not through dominance, but through undeniable competence. She spent weeks analyzing the kingdom's agricultural outputs, cross-referencing them with a century of weather patterns recorded by the keep's scholars. Recognizing that the northern reaches suffered from severe topsoil freezing, she introduced crop rotation techniques and deep trench greenhouses she had meticulously researched, but was never allowed to implement in her former home. Within 3 months, the Obsidian Keep's granaries were overflowing. She established strict, heavily guarded supply routes using the frozen rivers as highways for specialized sledges, a method far more efficient than the traditional mountain passes. Disease, which usually ravaged the lower classes during the brutal winters, plummeted due to her implementation of rudimentary public health measures and segregated clean water aqueducts. The plain woman was systematically transforming a barbaric military stronghold into a sophisticated, thriving empire. Alaric watched her with a mixture of awe and profound devotion. He had spent his life surrounded by warriors who roared for glory, but he found himself utterly captivated by a woman who whispered commands that moved mountains of grain and saved thousands of lives. The terrifying beast of the north was frequently seen walking through the keep's courtyards with his massive arm wrapped protectively around his quiet queen, listening intently as she explained trade tariffs and taxation reforms. Meanwhile, nearly 1,000 miles to the south, the Silverpine Pack was slowly fracturing. Alpha Silas had gotten exactly what he wanted: a visually stunning Luna who commanded attention the second she walked into a room. Genevieve was magnificent, hosting lavish winter balls, draping herself in the finest imported silks, and ensuring that the Silverpine elite recognized her flawless beauty. However, beauty could not balance a ledger. The winter hit the southern territories with unprecedented cruelty. Unseasonal blizzards buried the forests, trapping the hunting parties and freezing the primary rivers used for trade. Panic began to set in among the lower castes of the pack as the food stores dwindled at an alarming rate. Silas, enraged by the crisis, stormed into the pack's administrative archives to find the contingency plans his father had supposedly drafted for such emergencies. The dust-covered room was a chaotic mess of neglected parchment. Working by candlelight, Silas tore through the heavy leather-bound ledgers detailing the pack's agricultural yields, winter storage allocations, and emergency trade agreements from the past 5 years. As he frantically turned the pages, a cold realization paralyzed him. The handwriting in the ledgers, the meticulous, elegant script that had organized the pack's prosperity, predicted shortages, and expertly balanced the budgets for years, did not belong to his late father. Nor did it belong to the pack's elders. It was Beatrix's handwriting. For years, she had sat quietly in the shadows of the archive room, doing the grueling, complex work of running the pack's economy, while Silas and the warriors trained and boasted in the courtyard. She had been the invisible spine of the Silverpines, and he had literally handed her over to his greatest enemy. The heavy oak door of the archive room creaked open, breaking Silas out of his horrified stupor. Lord Lysander, the emissary who had delivered Beatrix to the north, stood in the doorway. He looked entirely, thoroughly shaken, his traveling cloak still covered in frost. "Lysander!" Silas snapped, his voice tight with a mixture of dread and fading arrogance. "Report. Is the tribute dead? Has King Alaric accepted the offering, or must we prepare our borders?" Lysander swallowed hard, his eyes darting away from his Alpha. "Alpha Silas, the king did not execute her, nor did he make her a servant." Silas frowned, stepping out from behind the desk. "Then what is she doing? Scrubbing the kennels?" "She is ruling them, sire," Lysander whispered, his voice trembling. "King Alaric claimed her as his fated mate on the night of the winter solstice. Beatrix is the lunar queen of the Obsidian Crown. The entire northern army answers to her word. And they are thriving. They have a surplus of grain, and their trade routes are expanding even in the dead of winter." The ledgers slipped from Silas's hands, crashing heavily onto the wooden floorboards. The woman he had publicly humiliated and discarded for being too plain was now the most powerful woman in the entire lycanthrope realm. And his own pack was starving because he had thrown away the only person who knew how to save them. By the time the brutal month of February arrived, the Silverpine Pack was on the brink of total collapse. 3 neighboring, smaller packs that usually relied on the Silverpines for protection and winter subsidies were threatening open rebellion. Genevieve's lavish parties had abruptly ceased. Her beauty had become a point of bitter resentment among the starving families who watched her parade through the village in pristine furs while their children went hungry. Silas had no choice. His pride, which had dictated every decision of his life, had to be swallowed, choked down like shattered glass. He assembled a small, heavily armed retinue and began the agonizing journey north. He was not going as a proud alpha, making a diplomatic visit. He was going as a beggar, desperately hoping to secure emergency grain and medicinal supplies from the Obsidian Keep. He convinced himself during the treacherous journey that Beatrix's elevation was merely a political stunt by King Alaric, a way to insult the Silver Pines. He reasoned that once he spoke to Beatrix, he could manipulate her. After all, she had been devoted to him for years. She was soft, quiet, and obedient. Surely she still harbored some affection for her homeland, perhaps even for him. He would play on her sympathies, apologize for the misunderstanding of her departure, and secure the aid his pack desperately needed. When Silas and his battered, freezing envoy finally reached the colossal black iron gates of the Obsidian Keep, they were met not with hostility, but with chilling, organized efficiency. Beta Kyle and the Shadow Guards stripped the Silverpine warriors of their weapons and escorted them through the sprawling fortress. Silas was immediately struck by the sheer scale of the prosperity around him. Even in the dead of winter, the courtyards were bustling. Smoke rose from massive foundries. Carts of grain were being transported to insulated silos, and the people looked healthy, well-fed, and fiercely disciplined. It was a stark, humiliating contrast to the rotting, desperate state of his own lands. The heavy ebony doors of the throne room swung open. The air inside was warm, smelling of pine and rich hearth fires. Silas braced himself to face the terrifying King Alaric, rehearsing his carefully crafted speech of diplomacy and subtle manipulation. He walked down the long, carpeted aisle, his eyes fixed on the dais. King Alaric was indeed there, leaning casually against the jagged stone of his throne, looking every bit the lethal warlord of legend. But Alaric was not the one sitting in the center of the dais. Sitting behind a massive desk of carved darkwood, surrounded by maps, scrolls, and ledgers, was Beatrix. She wore a structured gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that commanded respect without needing a single jewel to enhance it. Her chestnut hair was braided with silver wire, resting over one shoulder. The pale freckles that Silas had once mocked were now framed by an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. She did not look plain. She looked like a sovereign who held the weight of an empire and carried it effortlessly. Silas stopped at the base of the stairs, feeling an entirely unfamiliar emotion crawl up his throat. Inadequacy. Alpha Silas of the Silver Pines, Beatrix spoke, her voice calm, clear, and devoid of any emotional tremor. She didn't look up immediately, her quill scratching a final note on a parchment before she carefully placed it aside and met his gaze. We received word of your border troubles. To what do we owe the honor of your long journey? Silas cleared his throat, forcing a smile that felt entirely unnatural. Beatrix, it brings warmth to my heart to see you so well situated. The rumors of your ascension reached the south, though I admit I found them difficult to believe. A low, vibrating growl echoed through the cavernous room. It came from King Alaric. The Beast of the North pushed himself off the throne, his massive frame radiating lethal intent as his amber eyes locked onto Silas. You will address her as Queen Beatrix, or you will not leave this room with your tongue. Silas paled, taking a reflexive step back. Beatrix raised a single hand, a delicate, minimal gesture. Instantly, Alaric stopped. The fearsome warlord yielded to his mate's silent command, crossing his arms and watching Silas with murderous patience. We can dispense with the pleasantries, Alpha Silas. Beatrix said coldly, interlacing her fingers on the desk. You are not here for a social call. The Silverpine granaries have failed. Your western hunting grounds are frozen over, and the Whitewater Pack is preparing to mutiny against your leadership due to your inability to provide their winter subsidies. You are here to beg for grain. Silas stared at her, his jaw slack. How? How do you know the exact state of my borders? Because I am the one who built the infrastructure that kept those borders stable, she replied, her tone conversational but cutting like a scalpel. I read the weather patterns. I saw this winter coming 3 years ago. I drafted the contingency plans that you, presumably, ignored or threw away to make room for Luna Genevieve's imported silks. Silas felt his face burn with a humiliating flush of shame. He abandoned his diplomatic posturing, desperation clawing at him. Beatrix, Queen Beatrix, please. The pack is starving. Children are freezing. Whatever grievances you have with me, do not let our people suffer for my mistakes. We were betrothed. You know our people. I am asking for your mercy. Beatrix's expression remained an unreadable mask of calm. Mercy is a luxury afforded by those who plan for the future, Silas. You deemed me too plain, too unremarkable to lead. You wanted a queen who could command a room with her beauty, rather than one who could sustain a kingdom with her mind. She stood up, slowly descending the steps of the dais. Silas realized then that she didn't need towering height to be intimidating. The sheer weight of her intellect and the backing of the most powerful army in the world made her the most terrifying person in the room. I will not let the innocent people of the Silverpines starve, Beatrix said, stopping a few feet from him. The Obsidian Keep will supply you with 300 tons of grain, salted meats, and medical supplies. We will open the eastern river routes to your merchants. Relief washed over Silas so intensely, his knees nearly buckled. Thank you. Thank you, Queen Beatrix. The Silverpines are eternally in your debt. I am not finished, Beatrix interrupted, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The aid comes with a price, a heavy one. Silas's relief evaporated. What price? You will sign over the sovereign rights of the Whispering Woods, your most lucrative timber territory, to the Obsidian Crown, Beatrix stated clearly, sliding a prepared document across the table. Furthermore, you will publicly step down as Alpha of the Silverpines, passing the title to your younger brother, Arthur. He possesses the humility and the logistical mind that you entirely lack. What? Silas gasped, his eyes wide with outrage. You cannot demand my throne. That is an act of war. It is not a demand, Silas. It is a transaction, Beatrix countered smoothly. You traded me away to save your own life. Now I am trading you away to save your pack. You have exactly 2 minutes to sign the treaty, or you can ride back to the south and watch your people eat each other. Silas looked past Beatrix to King Alaric. The king was smiling, a dark, terrifying smirk of pure pride as he watched his Luna dismantle a rival Alpha without shedding a single drop of blood. Silas's hands shook as he looked at the parchment. He had come expecting to manipulate a soft, discarded woman. Instead, he had walked directly into the trap of a master strategist. He realized, with crushing finality, that Beatrix was not a plain stone he had thrown away. She was a diamond that had finally found the light required to blind him entirely. The journey back to the Silverpine territories was a silent, agonizing funeral march for a man who was still breathing. Alpha Silas rode at the head of the procession, but he looked nothing like a leader. His golden hair was matted, his broad shoulders slumped, and the legendary ice-blue eyes that once commanded fear were now hollow and bloodshot. Trailing behind him were 50 massive transport sledges, heavily laden with obsidian grain, salted meats, and crates of medical supplies. They were the salvation of his people, bought with the currency of his absolute humiliation. When the convoy finally crested the final ridge and descended into the Silverpine Valley, the scene was one of grim desperation. The village centre, usually bustling with merchants and training warriors, was a ghost town of starving, shivering wolves. But as the heavy wagons rolled over the frosted cobblestones, the scent of fresh bread and cured meat carried on the wind. Doors creaked open. Gaunt faces peered out from behind frosted windows. Silas called for an emergency assembly in the great hall. The very room where he had so arrogantly discarded Beatrix just months ago was now filled with the angry, desperate murmurs of his starving pack. Genevieve stood on the dais, draped in a heavy cloak of imported white fox fur that cost more than a month's worth of rations. She looked annoyed rather than relieved, her perfect lips set in a deep pout. When Silas approached the dais, he did not take her hand. He didn't even look at her. "My people," Silas began, his voice cracking. It lacked the booming, resonant alpha command that usually vibrated through the hall. "The winter has broken us. We were hours away from total collapse, but the carts outside hold enough provisions to see us through to the spring thaw." A weak cheer rippled through the crowd, but it was quickly silenced when Silas held up a trembling hand. "However," he continued, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, "these supplies were not a gift. They were a concession, and the price exacted by the Obsidian Crown was absolute. To secure this food, I have surrendered the sovereign rights of the Whispering Woods timber reserves." Outrage erupted. The Whispering Woods were the economic lifeblood of the Silverpines. To lose them was to become a vassal state in all but name. "Silence!" Silas roared, a fleeting spark of his old self flaring up before dying instantly. "That is not all. The final condition of our survival demands a change in leadership. As of this moment, I abdicate my position. I strip myself of the Alpha title. The command of the Silverpines now falls to my brother, Arthur." The great hall fell into a stunned, breathless void. No Alpha ever stepped down willingly. They ruled until death or defeat in combat. To abdicate was the ultimate admission of failure. Genevieve's beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She stepped forward, her green eyes flashing with a venomous light. "Have you lost your mind?" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the stone walls. "You gave away our greatest asset and our throne. To who? Who forced you to do this?" Silas finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of disgust and profound regret. "To Queen Beatrix, the Luna of the Obsidian Crown." Genevieve physically recoiled, as if she had been struck. "Beatrix, that plain, snivelling little mouse? You let that pathetic creature dictate the terms of our pact." "She is not a mouse, Genevieve." A calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. Arthur, Silas's younger brother, stepped out from the crowd and ascended the dais. Unlike Silas, Arthur was leaner, possessing a quiet intelligence that had always been overshadowed by his brother's flashiness. "She is a master strategist, and while you have been parading around in silks, she has been running an empire." Arthur turned to face the pack, his posture instantly commanding the respect his brother had just lost. "My first act as Alpha is to ensure transparency. During my brother's absence, I took it upon myself to investigate why our emergency funds were so disastrously depleted before the winter even began. Beatrix left us with a surplus. It should have lasted 3 harsh winters." Arthur signaled to 2 guards, who carried a heavy wooden chest onto the dais. Arthur threw it open, revealing stacks of parchment and ledgers. "These are the private accounts of the Silverpine Treasury, channeled through the Beringer and Company Trading Guild, a mortal banking institution in the eastern human settlements." Genevieve's face drained of all color. The haughty arrogance vanished, replaced by the sheer panic of a cornered animal. "Luna Genevieve," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, interrogating register. Or rather, former Luna. The records clearly show that over the past 4 months, massive sums of pack wealth were not spent on imported goods as you claimed. They were funneled into private offshore accounts under your maiden name. You created phantom vendors, fake merchants who billed the pack for phantom supplies. You were siphoning our lifeblood to build a private fortune, preparing to abandon us when the pack inevitably went bankrupt. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar of betrayal. This was a real-world, devastating crime, embezzlement and fraud, committed while the people starved. It shattered the illusion of her divine right to rule. "It's a lie!" Genevieve screamed, backing away as the pack members began to surge forward, their eyes glowing with predatory rage. "He falsified those documents! Silas, do something!" Silas simply stood there, staring at the woman he had traded everything for. He saw her now not as a radiant beauty, but as a parasite who had fed on his arrogance and destroyed his legacy. He had thrown away a woman who meticulously planned for their survival, only to bind himself to a woman who meticulously planned his ruin. "Strip her of the Luna mark," Arthur commanded coldly. Guards seized Genevieve as she thrashed and cursed. The ceremonial silver collar was torn from her neck. She was publicly branded a thief and a traitor. "By the laws of the Silver Pines," Alpha Arthur declared over the screaming woman, "Genevieve is hereby exiled. She is stripped of her wealth and her name. If she is found within our borders by nightfall, she will be hunted." They dragged the screaming, sobbing woman out of the hall, tossing her into the freezing mud of the courtyard, with nothing but the clothes on her back. Arthur then turned to his brother. Silas looked broken, a shell of the golden warrior he once was. "And you, brother," Arthur said, his voice softening with pity, which was somehow worse than anger. "You are no longer an alpha. You are a basic wolf of this pack. You will work the lower quarries to pay off the debt of your negligence. May the goddess have mercy on your pride, because the North certainly did not." While the South was mired in the painful, ugly process of rebuilding its fractured society, the Northern reaches were experiencing a golden age, unlike any in recorded history. Spring arrived at the Obsidian Keep with a breathtaking suddenness. The heavy snows melted to reveal the massive, deep trench agricultural terraces Queen Beatrix had designed. Vibrant green shoots of winter-hardy wheat and root vegetables broke through the dark soil, a testament to her foresight. The keep was no longer just a grim military fortress. It was a thriving, bustling metropolis of trade, art, and innovation. Beatrix stood on the high balcony of the Starfall chambers, the morning sun warming her face. The plain grey dresses of her past were long gone. She wore a stunning, flowing maternity gown of deep emerald silk, elegantly tailored to accommodate the prominent swell of her stomach. She was 7 months pregnant, with the heir to the obsidian crown. She rested a hand on her belly, feeling a strong kick. A soft smile touched her lips. She was no longer the quiet observer hiding in the shadows of the archives. She was the architect of an empire, revered by the most terrifying warriors in the realm. Heavy, familiar footsteps sounded behind her. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, and a chin dusted with dark stubble rested gently on her shoulder. King Alaric pulled her back against his broad chest, inhaling deeply, his wolf purring at the scent of vanilla, parchment, and the new sweet aroma of their unborn pup. "You are out of bed early, my queen," Alaric murmured, his deep baritone vibrating against her back. "The healers said you should be resting." "The healers worry too much," Beatrix replied, leaning into his solid warmth. "Besides, the trade caravans from the eastern human provinces arrived today. I need to review Chancellor Desmond's tariff reports before the council meeting." Alaric chuckled, a rich, genuine sound that was still a rarity to everyone but her. Only you, Beatrix, could find romance in tariff reports. He turned her around gently, his amber eyes scanning her face with an intensity that still took her breath away. He reached up, his calloused thumb tracing the smattering of freckles across her nose. You are radiant. And you are distracting me from state business, Your Majesty, she teased, though she didn't pull away. Their peaceful morning, however, was soon interrupted by the harsh reality of ruling a massive kingdom. During the midday council meeting in the war room, Beta Kael delivered urgent, troubling news. My king, my queen, Kael reported, pointing to a large map spread across the heavy oak table. We have received confirmed intelligence. A coalition of rogue packs, funded by the remnants of Lord Reginald's loyalists in the eastern mountains, have amassed a force of 3,000 warriors. They believe that because the Keep has focused heavily on agriculture and trade this year, our military has grown soft. They are marching on the Crescent Valley. The room erupted into angry shouts. The generals demanded an immediate, full-scale frontal assault. Alaric's eyes darkened, his beast rising to the surface, ready to slaughter those who dared threaten his mate and his unborn child. Beatrix held up a single hand. The room fell instantly silent. The generals who had once sneered at the plain southern girl now hung on her every word. A frontal assault will cost us hundreds of lives, Beatrix stated calmly, her hazel eyes scanning the topographical map. The Crescent Valley is a natural funnel. If we meet them head-on, their numbers will overwhelm our vanguard before our heavy infantry can deploy. She picked up a carved wooden marker and moved it to the high ridges surrounding the valley. We do not fight them. We trap them. Beatrix outlined a brilliant, unorthodox strategy. She knew that the Silverpine Timber Tribute, thousands of massive, dense ironwood logs, was currently stationed at the top of the Crescent Valley ridges, waiting to be processed. She instructed Alaric to send a small decoy force into the valley to draw the rogue coalition deep into the center. Once they were committed, the engineers would release the timber. An avalanche of ironwood, Alaric said, his eyes widening as he grasped her plan. It will crush their flanks and block their retreat without us sacrificing a single soldier. Exactly, Beatrix confirmed, her voice steel. Let them learn that the North does not just fight with claws and teeth. We fight with the earth itself. 2 days later, the battle unfolded exactly as Beatrix had orchestrated. The rogue coalition, roaring for blood, charged into the Crescent Valley, chasing the decoy unit. When they reached the center, the deafening crack of explosive charges echoed through the mountains. Thousands of massive ironwood logs thundered down the steep ridges, a terrifying tsunami of timber that pulverized the rogue ranks and trapped the survivors in a tight, inescapable cage. Alaric's main army then descended, forcing a mass surrender within an hour. It was the most decisive, bloodless victory in the history of the Obsidian Crown. When Alaric returned to the keep, covered in the dust of the valley but uninjured, he did not celebrate with his warriors. He marched straight to the Starfall chambers, dropping to his knees before his wife, pressing his face against her pregnant belly, and swearing his eternal devotion to the woman who was not just his mate, but the true savior of his people. 6 weeks later, as the summer solstice bathed the northern mountains in unending daylight, Queen Beatrix gave birth to a healthy, screaming baby boy. They named him Valerian, meaning strength and health, a departure from the traditional violent names of the northern kings. To honor the birth, emissaries from every corner of the realm traveled to the Obsidian Keep. Among them was Alpha Arthur of the Silver Pines. The southern pack was slowly recovering under his pragmatic rule, strictly adhering to the treaties Beatrix had drafted. Arthur stood in the grand throne room, bowing deeply as Alaric and Beatrix sat upon their twin thrones, baby Valerian sleeping peacefully in Beatrix's arms. The Silver Pines bring gifts of prosperity and eternal loyalty to the Crown Prince, Arthur announced, presenting chests of rare southern herbs and finely crafted silver weapons. He looked up at Beatrix, his eyes filled with genuine reverence. "You have built a paradise out of stone and ice, Queen Beatrix. We are humbled by your grace." Beatrix inclined her head gracefully. "Prosperity requires vigilance, Alpha Arthur. Ensure your people never forget the cost of arrogance." Far to the south, in a damp, miserable, rogue settlement near the human borders, a woman in tattered, filthy rags scavenged through a refuse pile for half-rotten scraps of food. Genevieve's golden hair was a matted, greasy mess, her once flawless face scarred by frostbite and the brutal reality of survival outside the pack system. Nearby, hauling heavy stones in a muddy quarry under the whip of an overseer, a broken, hollow-eyed Silas labored in obscurity, his name forgotten by the history books. They had desired a kingdom built on glittering illusions and superficial dominance. They had traded away a quiet genius for a beautiful poison. The annals of lycanthrope history rarely sing of the quiet ones. They glorify the blood-soaked warlords and the breathtaking beauties who start wars with a single glance. Yet the tale of the Obsidian Crown stands as a stark, undeniable testament to a different kind of power. Beatrix was discarded for lacking the loud, ostentatious flair demanded by fools, deemed too plain to wear a silver crown. But in the hands of a king who recognized that true value lies beneath the surface, she became the architect of an era. Her legacy proved that a kingdom is not sustained by the roar of an alpha or the vanity of a false Luna, but by the meticulous, brilliant mind that calculates the winter harvest and the steady hand that turns adversaries into allies. The woman they gave away as worthless scrap forged an empire of unbreakable steel, proving forever that the most brilliant jewels often look like simple stones until they are placed in the light they deserve.